Kijk aan luistertoets 2019 Engels, VMBO, gemengde en theoretische leerweg, Audiodeel. In het nu volgende deel ga je luisteren naar een programma over het leven in afgelegen koude gebieden. Er komt eerst een inleiding. Hierbij is geen opgave.
Winter sports aside, many of us would aim to travel in the clement weather with fine sunny days. But some of us do enjoy the harder, harsher landscapes of winter, the frosts and deep, sound-deadening snow. My next guest loves travelling in cold landscapes. Sarah Moss is a novelist and academic, currently working at Exeter University, writing fiction when she's not teaching.
Tot zover de inleiding. Lees nu de opgave.
So what is it about a cold landscape that appeals?
Well, it's interesting because it's pared down, it's erased, it's flat, and of course you can see for a very long way. It's that sense of a black and white minimal landscape and seascape.
And the big, also with that you can see a long way, that big open sky. Is that a part of it too? That
Yes.
You're feeling you're in a really big space.
Yes, and feeling very exposed, especially in Iceland where I've been spending time recently. It's one of the big contrasts between Iceland and mainland Europe is the lack of trees, the lack of buildings, that sense of it's just you and the sea and the sky.
1.
What's so fascinating about it, Skara Brae, it wasn't liminal and it wasn't peripheral thousands of years ago because the North Atlantic was a high road and there were no roads. And it was much easier to get around those places by boat than it was over land. So the little towns which now seem remote and far away weren't remote and far away at all. They were bustling. They had a lot of trade going through. If you look between the 10th and the 15th century in the North Atlantic, there's this steady passage of people going from the Mediterranean round to Iceland and back. So it was quite busy, actually.
It's interesting to think of that sort of Celtic fringe thing that we forget now that these places were so busy and connected with vast parts of the world that one assumes were utterly remote.
2.
You also spent perhaps more recently just thinking of a slightly more local wilder land and wild landscape is the Scottish Highlands. Is there a difference? Is there something else there that appeals?
Yes, it is different. It feels much less rugged. Orkney is very flat. I mean, it's just these little, well, with a few exceptions, it's very flat. In a lot of the islands, you can stand in the middle and see the sea all the way around you. Yeah. And they're very densely inhabited. It's not wilderness in Orkney at all. And that's a lot of the appeal, is this archaeological richness, a constant sense of people having been there. And I'm more interested in the inhabited spaces. It's the human stories that appeal to me rather than these kind of wilderness. Whereas if you go out into the Highlands, it's much bleaker, it's much more conventional wilderness. And of course there were people there, but you apart from in the clearance villages, you don't usually have that same feeling.
No.
3.
And in 2009, you went and to work at the university in Reykjavik. What was it like? Did it seem very different, being based perhaps particularly as you were in Reykjavik? And also, how did the children get on? What did they make of it?
It was very different from the first time because we were living in the city and working, but it meant that we actually integrated. I mean, when I went travelling when I was 19, it was really all about the landscape. Going back this time, it was much more about becoming part of the community. The children loved it. There are outdoor swimming pools which everybody uses all year round, especially during the winter. And we were there a lot, several times a week. That was great for the children. It's a very child-friendly place. There's no expectation that children will be kept quiet or not be seen in art galleries and museums. That was good.
4.
I think Icelanders have quite a vexed relationship with the mythology because, on the one hand, it's at the core of the culture and the history and something that they clung to very firmly through the centuries of Danish colonisation. On the other hand, there's an anxiety about being seen as a nation of people who believe in elves, which is the standard thing that everybody says. And modern Icelanders get really, really annoyed by that one. But for example, at Christmas, there's no Father Christmas. There are 13 trolls that come down out of the mountains. They're called things like door knocker and sausage stealer. These are not Father Christmas figures. They're trolls. They're malevolent. They're coming to steal things and slam doors in the night and howl outside the window. And they're sneaking around in the dark and the wind. I think it was probably a way of stopping the children going out on their own in winter because it was dark and you would die.
And the trolls would get you.
And the trolls would get you.
5.
In het nu volgende deel ga je luisteren naar een programma over de kledingindustrie in Groot-Brittannië. Er komt eerst een inleiding. Hierbij is geen opgave.
UK textiles have been under severe international attack for 100 years, but the competition intensified in the 1980s and 90s as new world free trade rules enabled UK retailers to switch to much cheaper suppliers in the Far East. British manufacturers simply couldn't compete with low-cost suppliers thousands of miles away. The British clothing industry dwindled and dwindled to a fraction of its former glory. But now there are signs of revival here in Britain, and that's what this programme is all about.
Tot zover de inleiding. Lees nu de opgave.
Gillian Marjoram, the founder of Leanne Fashions in Hinckley in Leicestershire. Your customers, who were they?
They were people that knew of me, so they approached me. We found little niches in the market that someone would pay a little bit more and have control of their make, and we would turn round work very, very quickly. And it just allowed us to grow. And we built up a very nice customer base. I never thought I would see the return of manufacturing into the UK. However, there is a lot of noise about manufacturing coming back.
You said a very interesting phrase then, a lot of noise. Is there really any evidence that it's happening?
There is evidence that it's happening. Yes, we won't do the 150,000 pieces per style, but yes, we'll do the 10,000, the quick response, and also the good quality.
6.
Kevin O'Mara of SCM World.
Our data shows that there's a little bit of a reverse towards at least some reshoring or bringing home of manufacturing.
What are the factors bringing it back?
Cost is what drove everybody off in the first place, looking for low-cost manufacturing. And the cost differential has narrowed, in particular with China, where wages have risen substantially. At the same time, though, other factors, in fact, more important factors, have taken place that have driven the analysis back towards reshoring. Market access is a huge one. I'd like to be close to my customers when I make something. That is causing people to rethink where they've located their plants and look for locations closer to home, closer to market.
7.
Dahlia Simble is head of sourcing and production at the luxury women's wear design label Roland Murray, based in London, selling all over the world.
I'm proud to say that we manufacture between 50 to 70% right here in London. I globalised in the 90s with everybody else and we offshored, but in the last 7 years there has been a growth in UK manufacturing, not just in the luxury sector but at the high street end as well.
So you go to local manufacturers because they can do what you want at the price you want?
Absolutely. Our products are not price sensitive. However, the high street are manufacturing in London as well, so it's not just luxury. From my point of view, I can produce the quality in a very, very collaborative way. We're very hands-on with our manufacturers, and that relationship is really key in terms of achieving the product level that we want, and the skill is in London.
8.
Let's ask the ASOS retail director Maria Hollins how much UK manufacturing the company is now doing.
It's small. We do about 4% of our business in the UK. We are looking at ways to expand it. It's quite limited, the product types that we can get in the UK at the moment. It tends to be jersey, knitwear, a little bit of woven product, and then there's a bit more premium and specialist areas, like we do actually do some shoes, but they tend to be more high-end products.
And there isn't the capacity or the price capacity for extending this into dresses and things like that?
I mean, price is not really something that we look at. The reason we use the UK is all about speed to market. Customers' needs are constantly changing. They want the latest fashion, the latest trends. They're looking at obviously what celebrities are wearing and they're very influenced by that, and they want it now.
9.
Now to a small business in North London called Fashion Enter, where a group of mainly women employees are busy making jersey dresses for ASOS. ASOS has put money into what is run as a social enterprise. Most of the staff are recent immigrants with machinist experience, but as part of its social mission, Fashion Enter has its own stitching school to address the skills shortage here at home. The company has created a 6-week entry-level NVQ course to bring new blood into the industry.
10.
The founder of the interesting little social enterprise Fashion Enter is Jenny Holloway. She was once a buyer for Marks & Spencer. Now she's using her frontline experience, having switched to homegrown manufacturing.
I think there is this misconception that if you make in the UK it's expensive. Well, that's not true. I think that if you compare what's being made in Hong Kong and Vietnam, etc., by the time you've looked at your social footprint, when you've looked at the cost of transportation, by the time you've sent people over there to do checks and you're sending the fabric from one place to another, it's time for the UK to have a real rebirth.
11.
In het nu volgende deel ga je luisteren naar een programma over leven onder water. Er wordt gesproken over saturation diving. Dit is een methode die gebruikt wordt om diep te kunnen duiken en lang diep onder water te kunnen blijven. Er komt eerst een inleiding. Hierbij is geen opgave.
It's Sunday morning in the Florida Keys on board the RV Sabina, anchored 5.5 miles from shore. I'm struggling with my wetsuit and heavy air tank in these choppy waters, preparing for a dive. On board with me are aquanauts from Florida International University, researchers about to get their first taste of saturation diving. 20 metres beneath the boat on the seabed sits the Aquarius Reef Base, the world's only underwater research station, which will be home to the aquanauts for the next week. Today I get to join them, although just for a few hours.
Tot zover de inleiding. Lees nu de opgave.
The dream of working and living under the sea has a rich history that started years before we ever stepped foot on the surface of the moon. It was former French naval commander and undersea pioneer Jacques Cousteau who captured the world's imagination when he created the Conshelf underwater village in the Red Sea.
Commander, what will it be like to live under the sea as opposed to going under for a few minutes just to swim around for fish?
Well, the houses, or the camps, if you wish, has to offer facilities not only for sleeping, eating, bathing and all these things, but also must offer distractions, television, radio, cinema, really we have to take care of the people for long periods of time with all the requirements.
It won't be like living in a prison?
No, besides, people will go out in the sea and this will give them a great amount of autonomy.
12.
In 1969 came Tektite.
Called Tektite 2, it's the underwater base for a research project being run by a group of American universities with United States government backing.
Sylvia Earle is an oceanographer and marine conservationist who spent 2 weeks inside Tektite.
What we really valued about the experience was just the joy of being able to go out into the ocean 24 hours a day. It was a great place to have a base, but the real advantage was using the ocean as a laboratory. We'd come back and swim through a liquid door into our underwater dwelling. 4 rooms, nice dry, warm, environmentally controlled, pleasant environment inside. It was really home.
13.
Astronaut Chris Hadfield spoke to me about his time on Aquarius as part of NASA's Extreme Environment Mission Operations, or NEMO project.
We've tried training out in the desert, and for training to walk on the moon, we've worked around lava flows. But for living on a space station where you're very much cooped up inside a small cylinder for a long time, one of the best simulators we have is at the bottom of the sea. It's not like we were thousands of meters down, but even just living 20 or 30 meters down, you cannot just come up to the surface. You are trapped. So that extra level of isolation changes the psychology of it. And that's an important part of getting ready for the reality of living on board the International Space Station.
14.
Dr. Kevin Fong is author of Extremes.
So it's only really been about a century since we started going into these genuinely physically extreme environments. And that's because we needed the fruits of first the industrial and then the technological revolution. And wherever we went, whether it was to high altitude, whether it was into the water, to the polar ice caps, into space, we learnt the same thing about all the extreme environments, which is you can go there, but not for long and not without penalty. In space, it's the wasting of bone and muscle, the deterioration of your hand-eye coordination. In the subaqua environment, it's the intense pressures on the tissues of your body.
15.
Dr. Kevin Fong.
If you've ever lived in a house with anyone and you've had a row, the first thing you do is storm out of the room, if not the house, and you're not going to do that in space or indeed in a subaqua habitat. Well, you can, but it'd just be very messy. And so, yes, that interpersonal dynamic is very, very important. In fact, when they first thought about sending people into space, they mused upon who would make the best types of astronaut, and they did think that actually submarine crews might also be as good as, if not better than, these airmen. I think it was a bit of a default that they went for people who flew fast jets rather than people who might be more appropriate to the psychological stresses and strains of space.
16.
In het nu volgende deel ga je luisteren naar een programma over zoetstoffen. In het programma worden zoetstoffen vergeleken met suiker. Er komt eerst een inleiding. Hierbij is geen opgave.
Which is worse, fat or sugar? It's the hottest question in nutrition right now, with sugar in particular being targeted as public enemy number one.
And so in this programme we're going to focus on an ingredient that many see as the solution: artificial sweeteners.
Tot zover de inleiding. Lees nu de opgave.
In many food products, sugar performs different functions. If you have, say, simple products, it just delivers sweetness. But in more complex products, it reacts with the other ingredients, it delivers flavour, it delivers colour, and therefore if you try and reduce sugar without considering what it's doing in the product, you have unintended consequences.
Dr. Julian Cooper represents AB Sugar, one of the biggest sugar companies in the world. They operate in 10 countries, produce 5 million tonnes of sugar a year, and employ 40,000 people. And although 3/4 of squash drinks on the market and over 1/3 of all fizzy drinks use sweeteners, his talk was a reminder of how dependent many processed foods still are on sugar.
17.
Let's take a closer look at stevia. Stevia is the new kid on the block, changing the way sweeteners are marketed. Market experts have forecast stevia sales to rise 150% to make it the second most used sweetener. The food industry love it because it can be marketed as plant-based, with labels decorated with sketches and photos of the stevia plant. A plant they grow in one of the glasshouses at the Chelsea Physic Garden, where I met head gardener Nick Bailey.
Yeah, it's an interesting plant. I mean, it's been used for probably 1,000 years in its native Paraguay and Argentina. And if you take a leaf from the top, right at the top of the plant, it has this extraordinary sweetness, and it's thought to be sort of 200 or 300 times the sweetness of sugar.
18.
Research taking place around the world indicates that the way our bodies process artificial sweeteners is far more complex than we first realized. The most recent work to cause a stir was published by Professor Susie Swithers. For more than a decade, Professor Swithers has been carrying out her own animal tests, monitoring the impact of diets with sugar and with artificial sweeteners.
Animals that get the artificially sweetened versions of these foods eat extra food and they gain extra weight. Over periods of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, people who drink diet sodas compared to people who don't drink diet sodas have higher risk for outcomes like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and stroke.
19.
Einde van het audiodeel.